I am going to speak today about my life, my work, and some of the guiding philosophies that shape my interpretation of the world through pictures. Context is important, and as such, I have to begin where it all started for me. Not in my native country of Chile, but with my father and his Harley Davidson. My father, William B. Purtell, was an American born in Whitman near Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1915. He was a jack of all trades, a globe-trotting merchant marine, a tailor, a furrier, an appliance salesman, and a Baptist minister. I like to joke that my artistic talent comes from him, as he was also somewhat of a con artist. But most importantly for me, he loved motorcycles. At the end of the Korean War, his latest gig on a merchant ship deposited him in Alaska. And because he hadn't been able to jump off at another more exciting port due to the war, he found he had some money in his pocket. So he wrote to Harley Davidson requesting that they donate one of their bikes. He would use it on a trip he had planned, starting in Fairbanks, Alaska, and ending at the southern end of America. Arriving in Buenos Aires, Argentina, some 9,000 miles later. Once there, he imagined the red carpet, that it would be rolled out for him by Perón, who, in addition to a dictator, was a motorcycle enthusiast. Wild Bill, as his friends call him, would become an instant celebrity. That was his dream. None of this happened. Harley Davidson would not give him a free motorcycle. They claimed they had given too many that year, or maybe they sniffed a con. Nevertheless, he purchased his own bike, affording only the smallest and lightest one. In those days, superhighways didn't exist. The Pan American Highway was a 2-lane dirt road for the most part. And many times, one would have to get into a small vessel to cross the water where the highway would abruptly end. There were dense forests in the Mato Grosso, where there was no road whatsoever. He made it as far as the Atacama Desert at the northern tip of Chile, which happens to be the driest desert in the world. The roads there are not kind to motorcycles, and it is there that the frame of his bike broke. He was in the middle of nowhere and had no luck in getting it repaired. I imagine it must have been disappointing to his ego, especially after the Odyssey style journey he had just clocked. Leaving his beloved bike behind, he made his way to Santiago by train. His plan was to then travel to the port city of Valparaiso to jump on a ship that would take him back home. Once in Santiago, he met my mother, who was working at a travel agency. They fell in love, got married, and traveled around Chile. ending up in the farthest northern city, Arica. My mother was then pregnant with me, so my father said he would return to the U.S. to close his affairs, then come back to Chile. He said goodbye at the border, and that was the last my mother saw of him. My mother never spoke of him to me. To her, my father was dead. I never actually met my father, but over time I realized he traveled to escape where I have always traveled to discover who I am. My mother was a strong woman. She raised me in Santiago on her own, at a time that being both a working woman and single mother was very challenging. As her only child, we experienced the best and worst of one another. Eventually, my mother started an affair with a married man that would last almost 30 years. I was sent to a boarding school for boys, and toward the end of my high school years, I was ready to break free and go as far away as I could. Because of the restrictions I felt and the curiosity I had about my father's country, I took the opportunity to go to the U.S. as an exchange student with the American Field Service in early 1972. When I was 16, I was placed in the small town of Hamilton, Ohio, near the Kentucky border. I spoke very little English, and when I arrived, I had a total culture shock, even though I grew up in a city of 3 million. In a lot of ways, Santiago felt provincial in comparison, and later I felt the same in the smaller American cities I experienced, like New Bedford, Providence, and New Haven. After one semester in Ohio, I went back to Santiago to graduate high school and start college with the plan of studying architecture. Things didn't go to plan. I left Chile again in 1973. The political situation was very dire. I got out right before the coup d'etat, when the military took over the government, killing the democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende, and replacing him with the military dictator Augusto Pinochet. He was installed on September 11, 1973, my first 9/11, the day Allende was murdered. It was not until later that we Chileans and the world found out that the U.S., with the urging of the CIA, Kissinger, and Nixon, had helped the Chilean military stage the coup with the sole reason to protect their interests. This time I came to the U.S. to stay, as there were few possibilities to be an artist within a military dictatorship. My mother stayed in Chile, as did her whole family. So I was completely on my own. I returned to Ohio because my exchange program family invited me to stay with them if I ever came back to the U.S. In securing my citizenship afforded to me by my American father, I found that I had a half brother who was 15 years older and was as unaware of me as I was of him. Through luck, since he had the same name as my father, he was contacted by the immigration office. My brother immediately called me and without further ado had me hop on a Greyhound bus and relocate to Mattapoisett, Massachusetts, where he lived with his wife, mother, and 4 young sons. The pictures you're seeing behind me are from my latest book, Moral Minority, published by Stanley Barker last year. It was in Ohio that I first noticed the lack of walls enclosing property. In Chile, the houses were screened off in private. In the US, the houses were separated by open lawns or white picket fences. The fences were easy to leap over and neighbors seemed friendly. Growing up, I knew America through its TV shows and films, its music and concepts of freedom and possibility. The prim white fences looked the part, a display of affluence within reach. But beyond them, I also glimpsed a sprawling, enigmatic landscape where the American dream awoke to reality. Moral Minority starts at RISD. The beginning of the book is views of Providence. I had started college in America at the Southeastern Massachusetts University, which is now UMass Dartmouth, near where my brother lived. I still wanted to be an architect, and my brother encouraged me to start locally to get better at English and try out courses I might be interested in. I took classes in art history, graphic design, figure drawing, and photography. Photography was the winner. I transferred to RISD as SMU didn't have a proper photo department. Once I got to RISD, I began to take photography more seriously. Since I had been financially on my own since arriving in the US and was paying my way through college, I was also working at UPS. So I had classes, then I would load and unload trucks, then do it all over again the next day. I built a darkroom in the apartment I lived. The enlarger was on top of the stove. This passion and dedication only grew as I honed my craft, eventually leading me to Yale for my MFA. Yale was very academic in the sense that one was expected to speak clearly and with accuracy about one's work, never saying, "I feel." I learned a language that could be used to describe with more clarity what was going on in my work. However, because I was in school until 1982, I was a little insulated from the world and politics. Putting all my energy into my work, and in the confines of an Ivy League school. I had been politicized while living in Chile. Latin Americans, or at least Chileans, are very up to date with the political situation in the country and the world, especially at that time, as there were a lot of changes going on everywhere. When I was in boarding school, my classmates and I would protest what was happening in our country by locking ourselves in the classrooms, going on hunger strikes, and going out on the streets and getting into trouble with the police. We also channel our anger for good, helping to build low-income housing, much like Carter did here in the U.S. In the 80s, with Ronald Reagan in the White House, Christo-fascism was on the rise, calling themselves the moral majority to push religious doctrine through the Republican Party. The title of my book comes from that conservative catchphrase. I ask myself, if there is a moral majority, who is the moral minority? After Yale, I moved to New York City, scoring the old loft apartment in Tribeca that had once been Todd Papa George's, and started printing as a business and shooting commercially and editorially. At the time, Tribeca was a place full of artists who had converted all warehouses into live-work spaces. When I had time or money to go to a bar or out to eat, I became aware of the Wall Street good old boys that would go to the nightclubs nearby. They were so affluent, you could tell by their Armani suits and the fact that they had wads of cash showing off when they settled the tab with $100 bills, getting drunk and rowdy. They were a sharp contrast to the neighborhood residents, making a living on their art as best as they could. Most of the work in this book is made in the American Northeast, places where I spend my time, going to college, working, and taking short local trips. Compared to my first book, Love's Labor, which are images of young men, of a young man's journey. Compared to my first book, Love's Labor, which are images of a young man's journey through Europe. A lot of images in Moral Minority were taken much closer to my new home. I still travel, but it was perhaps with more focus. I did take a trip at one point that went all the way down to Mississippi, where I made a number of pictures towards the end of the book. The last quarter of the book is below the Mason-Dixon line. I began to see the inequalities and the balances of power in this nation, how groups of people are pulled apart by race or religion. The levels of disparity that kept people in their classes under the guise of morals or religion. Greed was good when dressed as an embodiment of American freedom and liberty. It is very interesting to me that this work has been published now, many years after it was made. When Trump was running for president the first time, I warned friends and colleagues that there was a big possibility that he would win. Most people didn't believe it would happen here in the United States. But because of what I had gone through in Chile, I could smell fascism in the air. I saw in him all the things I saw Pinochet do, in the way he addressed and abused people and did as he pleased. There's a road to fascism, and I saw the U.S. turning onto it. In many ways, when I look at these pictures now, they feel like a premonition. There are the seeds of the world in which we live today scattered through this vision of the United States. The photographs in Love's Labor remind people of what it feels like to relax and enjoy themselves without being glued to screens, and to have conversations with others in public spaces, and simply to take time to ground themselves. I want moral minority to have a presence in our current environment, to show some of the timeless elements of how we interact with each other, how we react when we are angry, or how we play and show off in public places. I feel as though, even in the smallest way, I need to show people to look at how we behave towards one another, even in the most unexpected places. I looked at Europe as a place where I learned about being itinerant and about our history. Now I want to show what I've learned about the United States after having lived here for over 50 years, and how I felt and feel being here. This country has offered me so much, and I hope it avoids another rise of the far right. The book is a gift to the place that embraced me. I care very deeply about how I behave and what I do. As I say on the back of the book, care implies a promise, and a promise brings hope. I love photography's ability to sustain time and capture its exacting description of life. Even now, every photograph I make is a love poem to photography, one in which I pay homage to life in all its forms. Though I speak critically about this nation's politics now, I like to say that I want my photographs to be generous, that is, not judging the world around me, but allowing the viewer to draw their own conclusions and create their own associations with the people and places I'm sharing with them. A narrative forms on its own and breathes life. There is something about this generous approach that distinguishes this body of work from one which I think it echoes in many ways which is Robert Frank's The Americans. Of course, that book was hugely influential for me in my journey with photography, as it has been for many of you, I'm sure. Robert was notoriously crotchety, especially in his old age. I remember I ran into him at an opening one time and went to tell him how much his work meant to me. He stared at me in the face and said nothing. This was at his first monumental show at a large institution, the Met, and the first time that all 83 images in The Americans were shown together on the wall. That book is another immigrant's vision of this country as an outsider. Though he was Swiss and I'm Chilean, he sought to understand this place through making pictures, and that is exactly what you see in my latest book. In this way, moral minority exists in the lexicon of Frank's work, but is perhaps less overtly critical or probing of its subjects. I approach making pictures gently, with empathy and curiosity for the people around me. I wanted to see the small gestures and stray looks that imbue unassuming moments with meaning. I wanted to find human tenderness in moments of rest, in moments of chaos. What drives me to photograph these moments is a faith in the validity of my intuition, or as I like to call it, fate. I accept luck as it comes. This is a fundamental force in my work and in my life. Real is the newest body of work I will show today. I started working on it in 2008. Obama was president, and we were in the beginning of the housing crisis. I was at a place where I thought I had outgrown wanting to photograph the world as it is, searching for beauty in a place where light and landscape meet. So I began to recreate a world in which I could take the kind of photographs I wanted to make. I tried reconstructing the parts of the world that had been discarded, abandoned, or thrown away. Ultimately, I was looking for some idea of reality and beauty rooted in the world we find ourselves in now. These images are mostly made in New York, my home for the last 40 years. I'm interested in how we lose things, in levels of reality, things that we see every day or have to live with every day. I see great value in documenting a city like this as it changes. In so many ways, this body of work is a continuation of the ideas you see in Moral Minority, though it has grown and evolved in many ways, as I have grown from a young immigrant to the person I am today. Real is still my attempt to understand this country through photographs. And in these pictures, I see many threads continued from my earlier work. For instance, in a discarded newspaper that hints at today's politics or how people wear the flag. In this sense, it feels right to move directly from one project to the other. This work has not yet been published, and so I'm grateful to be able to share it with you. Honestly, I think I could have 5 books from this material if I really wanted to. Just before I left to come here, I finally got rid of the empty boxes of 4x5 film I had shot for this project. Over 10,000 sheets, maybe 15,000. I mentioned that More Minority was a premonition of the world to come and the world that was forming socio-politically. I wonder how the pictures in Rio will feel in a few decades. Perhaps the same, though I hope to exhibit and publish it much sooner than that, and I'm making an effort to do so. Of course, my knowledge of this country has grown, as has my life here. Even my grasp on the English language has changed so much since I made the pictures in Moral Minority. This does not mean that I look at the world with less curiosity now than back then, only that I think and feel deeply while making them, and understand my place here perhaps a bit more concretely. My aim is to reveal a certain order, to see the world with intention. I am grateful to be sharing this work with all of you. This is my 4th time here, my first time as a keynote speaker. I know how valuable this time is for all of you, how much dedication you have put into your practices to bring you this moment. I feel all of this energy, and there is nowhere I would rather be. Thank you so much for your attention today, and a special thanks to Evan Laudenslager and my wife, Melanie Roberts, for helping me gather images and thoughts for this presentation. I would like to close this presentation on a positive note with some words of encouragement to get us all through these 4 coming years. Kindness is not a weakness. It's a choice we make to see others as ourselves, as imperfect beings worthy of love. Let failure be part of your life. Be a teacher rather than a judge. And do things you love without apology. Thank you.